Every month, a tenant in a luxury high-rise writes a rent check for around $2,800. Multiply that by 300 units in the building and 12 months in the year, and on paper, that's roughly $10 million a year flowing straight to the owner. That's the number investors get shown in the pitch deck, and it's technically true. What the pitch deck does not show you is everything standing between that $10 million top line and what actually lands in the owner's pocket. Because almost none of it survives the trip intact. By the time you subtract what it costs to build the place, what it costs every time a tenant leaves, what it costs to keep the building running, and what happens when the local rental market decides your rent isn't worth what you thought it was, that clean $10 million story turns into something far messier. That's what we're actually breaking down today. Start with the money that has to go in before a single tenant ever signs a lease. Land and construction are two separate fights, and both of them are brutal in their own way. Land cost depends entirely on where you're building, and location isn't a preference here. It's the whole game, because a luxury building only works in a location where people are willing to pay luxury rent. Once you've secured that land, construction costs for a mid-rise apartment building currently run somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 per unit. And for a true high-rise with the amenities that justify calling something luxury, that number can run $350,000 to over $700,000 per unit. A modest 50-unit mid-rise sits around $11 million all in. A luxury high-rise with 200 or 300 units can easily clear $100 million before a single lease is signed. And none of that includes the soft costs that quietly balloon every project: architecture, permitting, financing interest that accrues during construction, and inspections that can stall a schedule for months. If you want to see how those soft costs actually stack up on a real project budget, that's exactly the kind of breakdown I can build next. So let me know in the comments if that's useful, because the rest of this video assumes you already understand why the building itself is the smaller half of the fight. Here's the part almost nobody accounts for accurately going in: tenant turnover. Every time a resident moves out, the unit does not simply refill itself. Industry data puts the average cost of a single apartment turnover at somewhere around $3,800 once you count lost rent during the vacancy, marketing to find a new tenant, cleaning, repainting, minor repairs, and staff time spent on the whole process. That number matters more than it sounds like it should, because national apartment turnover rates run somewhere between 45% and 60% a year. On a 300-unit luxury building, even a conservative turnover rate in that range means well over 100 units cycling through that $3,800 cost every single year. That's close to $500,000 a year disappearing into a line item most rent roll spreadsheets barely account for. And it's happening whether the building is thriving or struggling. Leasing expenses industry-wide rose nearly 5% in a single recent year, driven largely by a 17.5% jump in turnover costs specifically. Turnover isn't a rare inconvenience in this business. It's a permanent recurring tax on the property, and it hits luxury buildings especially hard because luxury tenants expect a flawless, freshly finished unit every time, which means no cutting corners on the turn. Then there's the overhead of simply keeping the building running, separate from any individual tenant moving in or out. Property taxes on a high-value building are substantial and rarely move in the owner's favor. Insurance premiums on large residential properties have been climbing sharply in recent years, especially anywhere exposed to weather risk, and in some coastal and wildfire-prone markets, premiums have risen so fast they now rival the property tax bill itself. Staffing a luxury building properly, doormen, maintenance technicians, leasing staff means real payroll every single month regardless of how many units are occupied. And maintenance itself compounds over time. Repair and maintenance alone can represent well over 10% of a property's total operating expenses, and that percentage tends to climb, not fall, as buildings age and as turnover-related repairs increase. None of these costs care whether the building is 95% occupied or 70% occupied. They show up on the same schedule either way, which is exactly why vacancy hurts a luxury property so much more than the lost rent alone suggests. There's one more layer sitting underneath all of this that most people touring a luxury lobby never think about: how the building itself was financed. Almost nobody builds a $100 million apartment complex with cash. It's financed with a construction loan, and that loan starts accruing interest the day it's drawn, long before a single unit is move-in ready. If construction runs 6 months behind schedule, and on large multifamily projects it frequently does, that's 6 extra months of interest payments on tens of millions of dollars, with zero rental income coming in to offset it. Once the building is complete, most owners refinance into permanent, longer-term debt, and the interest rate available at that moment, not the rate assumed when the project first broke ground, often determines whether the deal actually pencils out. A project modeled at a 5% refinance rate that instead refinances at 7% can see its annual debt service jump by hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single mid-size building, money that has to come directly out of the same net operating income that turnover and maintenance were already eating into. This is where the real mechanics of ownership show up, and it's the part that actually determines what the building is worth on paper, not just what it earns in a given month. Multifamily real estate gets valued using something called a cap rate, and the formula is simple. Take the property's net operating income, meaning revenue minus operating expenses, and divide it by the cap rate the market assigns to that type of asset, typically somewhere between 4 and 7% for multifamily. Here's why that matters so much more than people realize. If poor tenant retention costs you $50,000 a year in lost net operating income, and your building trades at a 5.5% cap rate, you haven't just lost $50,000. You've erased roughly $900,000 of the building's actual market value, because every dollar of NOI gets multiplied through that valuation formula. A leaky faucet nobody fixed for a month, a turnover that took 6 weeks instead of 2, a maintenance team that's understaffed and slow. None of it looks dramatic in the moment. All of it quietly compounds into a number that shows up the day you try to sell or refinance the building. And speaking of the market deciding what your rent is actually worth, that brings us to the piece almost every luxury developer underestimates: market rate rent volatility. Rents are not fixed. They move with supply, demand, and how many other developers had the exact same idea you did at the exact same time. Look at what happened across Sunbelt cities like Austin and Phoenix between 2023 and 2025. Pandemic-era migration convinced developers that demand in these markets was permanent, so they built aggressively, all at once. Austin alone added around 32,500 new apartment units in 2024 and another 17,500 in 2025. The result was entirely predictable in hindsight and completely missed by almost everyone building at the time. Class A luxury rents in Austin fell over 2.5% in a single year, while older Class B and C buildings fell even further. Phoenix median rents dropped roughly 4% in 2025 alone, and landlords there started offering as much as 3.5 months of free rent just to fill newly built luxury units. National apartment vacancy climbed from around 5.5% in 2021 to over 7% by the middle of this decade. That's not a rounding error in a spreadsheet. That's the exact rent assumption every one of those developers used to justify their construction loan, quietly evaporating in real time. If you're building or buying in a market right now, drop your city in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious how many of you are watching your own rent numbers move the same direction Austin and Phoenix just did, and it might shape which market I break down next. Here's what that oversupply story actually reveals about the whole business. A luxury apartment complex is not a fixed income asset, even though it gets marketed to investors like one. Every input, land, construction, turnover, maintenance, and rent itself is variable, and every one of those variables can move against you at the same time your loan payment stays exactly the same. The developers who actually make money long-term aren't the ones who found the flashiest amenities to attract tenants. They're the ones who underwrote realistic turnover assumptions from day one, who kept maintenance disciplined enough to protect their NOI even in a soft market, and who had enough patience or enough cash reserve to survive a 2 or 3 year stretch where the market simply didn't cooperate the way Austin and Phoenix developers are living through right now. So the honest answer to whether a luxury apartment complex makes money is the same answer you'd get about almost any capital-intensive asset. It depends entirely on what happens after the ribbon cutting, not what the pitch deck promised before it. The rent check is never the business. The turnover rate, the maintenance discipline, the refinance rate, and the cap rate math sitting quietly underneath every one of those rent checks are. Get those wrong, and a building that looks completely full on paper, with a lobby full of granite countertops and a rooftop pool in every rendering, can still be bleeding value every single month while nobody outside the ownership group notices until it's time to sell. If this changed how you look at a luxury living building the next time you walk past one, subscribe, because next time we're taking apart another asset that looks like guaranteed income on the surface and turns out to be anything but underneath.